Hello and welcome to this video on law and order in the West. This is part 2 from 1876 onwards, so if you've not watched part 1, go find it and watch that first, and then the story will make more sense. So by 1876, which is kind of the final period of this study, law enforcement has absolutely improved. It does exist, but it does have its limits. There is a lot more peace and calm in some towns, but large areas remain quite violent and weakly policed. There's still that slightly confusing structure of the federal government in Washington sending in a governor, sending in the judges and the marshal for the territory, but also you've got at a more local level sheriffs operating and town marshals, and you've got the option of outside government law enforcement, the Pinkertons, or even vigilante committees. All those challenges still exist. Firstly then, let's have a look at a case study of these challenges in action. We're looking here at the Lincoln County War, famously involving Billy the Kid. Now, the Lincoln County War is a conflict between established cattle barons. Okay? It's part of range wars. These range wars are conflicts over land and power. So you've got Lawrence Murphy on one side, and then you've got John Tunstall on the other side, who's trying to set up a rival business. Now, Tunstall is threatened, and he's actually later killed by people working for the sheriff, who the sheriff had aligned himself with these established cattle barons, the Murphy that we've just mentioned before. So, to get revenge for his murder, a group of men who'd worked for Tunstall form a gang called the Regulators. And one of these men who had worked for Tunstall and wanted to avenge his murder is Billy the Kid, who, despite being young, had previous already for robbery and cattle rustling. And these regulators basically take law into their own hands. They perceive corruption, they perceive they're not getting justice, so they kill the sheriff, and they kill the sheriff's deputy. The killing escalates, about 20 men in total die in the conflict. Billy the Kid ultimately survives and goes on the run, showing again some of the weaknesses in law and order. He is eventually arrested by Sheriff Pat Garrett. He's charged with murder. He's sentenced to hang, but he kills 2 guards and escapes from jail. Again, this is showing the challenges of dealing with law and order. We've got conflicts between cattle barons, conflicts over business, and just the real difficulty in enforcing law and order in such a situation. Next up in our case studies then is Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral. So Wyatt Earp was a gunslinger, a lawman. Now, he had previous for cattle rustling, or actually horse rustling it was. He'd been arrested back in 1871, and rather than standing trial, he'd run away. And that didn't stop him from becoming a lawman. He was still allowed to do it. Okay, so he's in Tombstone, a rapidly growing mining town full of alcohol, weapons, and crime. There are laws about not carrying guns in such towns, but it's the Wild West. It's difficult to enforce them. So Tombstone is divided into 2 groups. On the one side, there's the Earp, so Wyatt Earp and his kind of posse, including his brother and his friend Doc Holliday. They represent law enforcement, but also business interests. On the other side are the Cowboys, the so-called Cowboys gang, Clanton and McClory families, who are linked to cattle rustling and intimidation. So you've got 2 sides openly hating each other and being violent. And it reaches breaking point at OK Corral in 1881 when the Earps attempt to enforce these gun laws on the Cowboys gang. They try and take their weapons off them. A gunfight breaks out. The shootout lasts about 30 seconds, but 3 of the Cowboys gang are killed. Wyatt Earp does survive, okay, and he's not punished for this, okay, this failed arrest. And it really just shows the problems with law enforcement. Wyatt Earp is probably not a suitable person to be a lawman, yet he is appointed one. He uses violence to settle personal grudges as well, really showing the fragility of law and order in the West. Finally, on our whistle-stop tour of key events in the later years is the Johnson County War. Now, the Johnson County War is another example of the range wars in action. So we had the Lincoln County War in 78. We've now got the Johnson County War. Now, homesteaders in Johnson County in Wyoming feel like their cattle barons, the big ranchers, are stealing their land. On the other side, the cattle barons feel that the homesteaders are getting in the way. They're blocking their use of the open range, and actually the homesteaders are accused of rustling, of stealing cattle. The vigilantes who are going to work for the cattle barons deal out justice in this story. There's a wealthy rancher, particularly called A.J. Bothwell. He's claiming land that had already been claimed by James Averill or Jim and Ella. They were accused of cattle rustling, and a mob is assembled and they kill Watson and Averill. Okay, they murder them. This essentially sparks this war. Okay, and we end up having the two sides of the cattle barons, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, the WSGA, versus the homesteaders and the less powerful individuals. Ultimately, the vigilantes kill them, okay, kill Jim and Ella, and the local people come out in defense. The homesteaders come out in defense of them, and they basically besiege the vigilantes inside a ranch. So you can see that vigilante group there in the picture. They posed for a picture before going off to kill people, which is never a great idea, okay? And they end up laying siege, okay? Ultimately, the army has to go and rescue these vigilantes to stop this from becoming even bloodier. Well, what does this all show? It shows just the chaos of law and order, doesn't it? Hiring vigilantes, having to bring in the army to help, the conflict between the larger ranchers and the homesteaders. And actually, despite the efforts of the local people to get justice for the murdered Jim and Ella, there are no prosecutions in the end. The trial falls apart, essentially because the barons are able to pay for the best lawyers. It does show, though, the challenges of law and order. So, some conclusions for us about the state of law and order by the end of the time period that we're studying, around 1895. Law and order has definitely improved, but it's not perfect. Why has it improved? Well, we've got more trained sheriffs and more trained marshals. There is better communication. We have the telegraph by the end of the period. We've got railroads. We've not just got the Transcontinental Railroad across America, but we've got railroads within states. It is easier for law enforcement officials to travel around. There's more regular courts. There's prisons established. So in many areas, there is a significant improvement in an area that's often known as the Wild West. However, though, as we've just discussed in our 3 case studies, there is still violence, there is still lawlessness, there's still potential for corruption, for vested interests. We've looked at the 2 range wars, particularly linked to the cattle industry of the Lincoln County War and the Johnson County War, and also the shootout at OK Corral. The Wild West is slightly less wild, but it's still got a bit of a kick. Thank you for watching. I hope that's been helpful, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye.